microscopic level, they exist to kill. They travel, they attack, they hide, they even gather together in defense maneuvers. Pathogens are the enemies of every member of the healthcare team. On Pathogens and PPE, we give you the tools you need to fight these threats and win. So sit back, tune in, and let's make these microbes tremble at the sound of your name.
Hey everybody, I'm here with my co-host Frankie. This is Jill Holdsworth, Manager of Infection Prevention at Emory University Hospital, Midtown in Atlanta, Georgia.
Hi, and my name's Frankie Catalfumo. I'm an infection preventionist at Inova Health System in Northern Virginia, and I'm your co-host.
And we are here for the very first episode of the Pathogens and PPE Beyond Clean podcast. And this first episode is all about the basics of infection prevention. And we have two special guests today, Deanna Hillstrom and Ben Galvan. And we are going to be talking about all sorts of things from the decon area to assembly to the most important things that we think are in SPD to struggles. You're not going to want to miss this. So stay tuned and we'll be right back. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of the Pathogens and PPE podcast with Beyond Clean. I'm here with my co-host, Frankie, and our awesome guest, Deanna and Ben. We're so excited to be here with you, and our first episode here is going to be all about the basics of infection prevention and SPD, and this is so exciting to have a whole season dedicated just to infection prevention. I can't tell you how excited we are to be here, and we hope that all of you guys are excited to be here too. We're going to start this off with letting our two guests introduce themselves. Why don't we start off with Deanna?
Good afternoon. I'm excited to be here. My name is Deanna Hillstrom. I am a manager of infection prevention for Novant Health in North Carolina.
Awesome. Go ahead, Ben.
I'm very excited to be here. My name is Ben Galvan. I'm the Director of Infection Prevention for HCA Florida South Tampa Hospital and HCA Florida West Tampa Hospital.
Awesome. We are super excited for you guys to be here. And I want to start this off with just kind of like an easy question to get us rolling. And I'm going to ask Frankie to actually answer this one too, just to get us all loosened up a little bit. What is so exciting to you about sterile processing and infection prevention? What really gets your passion going about sterile processing? Frankie, why don't you get started?
Yeah. So when it comes to sterile processing, I think it's pretty much a big puzzle. You're trying to connect all the dots and how it relates to patient safety. And it's a pretty complex puzzle, and not everybody wants to play with it. But for those people that really decide to dabble with sterile processing, it's a really great environment. And I just believe that hopefully with this podcast, we can get more people involved in it. But it's truly where a lot of patient safety can be enhanced. And that's why I really enjoy the complexity of it. I really like puzzles, and it's really what attracted me to sterile processing, especially as an infection preventionist myself.
Awesome. And I just have to also brag on Frankie a little bit. He's one of my fellow IPCRCSTs. So if you're an IP out there listening to us, we are happy to help guide you into how you can get certified as well. Let's throw it over to Ben now to go first with this one. What really gets your juices flowing with SPD?
Sure. So it's a subject in infection prevention that's not always intuitive. And it's something that a lot of us don't have a background in. And as infection preventionists, we love to learn. We love to learn something new. What can kind of help prevent infections in our patients, not only on the floor, but kind of in the background. And as someone who came from a background field like microbiology in the lab, I love learning more about those ancillary departments that we don't always get to see. And sterile processing is one of those areas where there's so much to learn and so much to digest. And once you learn it, you can really link it to more of what you're doing out on the floors and up in the OR as well.
Ben, I completely agree with you. I think it seems scary from far away. People are like, ooh, SPD, sterile processing, what's happening back there? But when you get back in there and you can actually see all the processes, you become more familiar with it and you can take it to the floor and you can begin to connect all those dots. So I agree. It's scary from a distance, but once you get in there and the unfamiliar becomes familiar, you really can begin to make an impact.
I would just echo everything that's been said so far. And I think my passion started during a survey when I was in front of one of our favorite surveyors, and some of the questions that kept coming up I wasn't 100% familiar with, and it was not a very comfortable feeling. And so I spent a lot of time with the sterile processing manager and with sterile processing techs, and my passion just grew from there, and just wanting to make sure that they understood the safety of it and how important their job truly is, and that surgery centers, hospitals, they really are the core part of any surgeries that are occurring.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I love how you are humble enough to admit that IPs don't always know everything. And I think that's so important for IPs and sterile processing professionals out there to hear, that we're okay admitting we don't know everything, because we don't. And we want you to teach us. We want to learn more and partner with you as much as possible, because we both have things to learn from each other, and we will only be successful and help our patients if we work together. So let's start off with our first kind of big question here. And let's start off with Ben. What do you feel are the most important things related to infection prevention, as we're talking about the basics here, when we're talking about sterile processing? What comes to your mind as you're rounding in sterile processing? What are those kind of basic things that you're looking for?
So really in sterile processing, when we're kind of looking at the environment. So really we're looking at two things. I think we're looking at the environment that SPD is being performed in, and then we're also looking at technique. So from an environmental standpoint, I think it's really important for us to understand from infection prevention what we're looking for that helps mitigate environmental risk for infection. So things like air pressure relationships, workflow, are we moving in the right direction, or are we potentially recontaminating things that shouldn't be recontaminated? Things like that help us kind of understand the risks of the environment to the processes. And then when we're looking at the processes themselves, are we following manufacturer's instructions for use for enzymatic cleaners and detergents? And are we packaging correctly? And are we running our sterilizers properly? And what do our logs look like? There's so much that goes into both aspects of sterile processing, at least from an IP perspective.
I think you hit the nail right on the head, Ben, when you say start looking at your environment. IPs, as long as you know a little bit, you're enough to be dangerous in any area that you get dropped into. And that's truthfully what it comes down to. When you start looking at the environment, you look at how the air flows. These are all the basics that IPs are familiar with from other parts of the hospital that you can immediately bring into sort of that SPD mental portfolio that you have and that you're going to build. And you can sort of build and build and build. So I like how you talk about seeing everything and then narrowing down all the way to your processes, that clean to dirty workflow. So everything you can build upon. Fabulous.
Yeah, exactly.
Deanna?
Now, I would just add on to what both you and Ben said, is that when it starts even before you get to sterile processing. Does the teams before they get there, do they know about the cleaning beforehand? Do they know about storage afterwards? So I think looking at that bigger picture is such an important thing that people don't always understand the importance of it.
You know, that's such a great point, Deanna. We were having a conversation just here recently, and it was so eye-opening to see a bunch of our surgeons who realized that, wow, you know, it does start with us. I love when it's like that, you know, mind blown moment that it doesn't just start in SPD when this cleaning process starts. We want to make sure that it's the before and after part. Just like you said, it's not just sterile processing. And that's where infection prevention can really help and become that integral team player with the instrumentation process, making sure that before they get to decontam, that the right processes are happening. And then after they leave the assembly area, that they're stored appropriately. So we can kind of tie that nice bow at the end of it and make sure everything is done properly. So such great points. Thank you both.
And I would add, you know, infection prevention, we're kind of taking that helicopter approach to various aspects of things that happen in our hospitals. And we're very good at seeing the entire cycle. And a lot of times people don't really have the opportunity to even see all the pieces that go to a cycle. So you think of even the chain of infection is a cycle. And how can you use that type of framework in SPD, where it's not just SPD, it's also the OR. It's also people on the floor that are using sterile instruments on the floor, and how does that entire cycle work? And helping everybody all the stakeholders that are kind of working within that cycle to understand how it all plays together.
Yeah, I would just add on to that the fact that so many people, they see like even sterile processing or the emergency departments or OR, different areas, they kind of have that one, almost not tunnel vision, but they just see what their area is. And so I think it's so important that infection prevention gets put at the table, is because they see those bigger pictures. They see they're part of those conversations with regulatory bodies or patient safety and things like that, where they can help really tie it together for sterile processing or for leaders or anybody else.
Absolutely. I think, Ben, you mentioned something that's quite great is when you talked about that 30,000 foot view. It's when you have that overarching purview of all the processes, you can begin to see a larger trend across the hospital, because IPs go everywhere in the hospital. Where there's the potential for harm, there is the opportunity for an IP to spend time there. So you don't need to know the nitty gritty, but you do need to know the right questions to ask, or even ask a general question to start finding out where you need to learn more.
Yeah, it's such a great point, too, to think about where do we have surgical instruments? Sterile processing isn't just in the sterile processing department. It is over the entire organization. And sometimes you don't even know where these instruments are. Are they in the ICUs? Are they in the NICU? Yes, they are. I'll give you the answer. And where are all of your procedural areas? And sometimes you may have nooks and crannies that are soaking instruments in some sort of random high-level disinfectant that you had no idea that they were doing that in. And I know that some of the IPs listening have found those nooks and crannies before, where you find the random tub of high-level disinfectant. So this is where it is so important that the sterile processing team is partnering with your IPs, because when you find things that are stored incorrectly or being soaked incorrectly in a random spot, you have to work together to find those solutions. So it's such a great point, Ben, that you really have to go on a scavenger hunt around your whole hospital to make sure things are being done correctly. And it does take going outside of the department. All right, let's switch gears. And instead of just talking about what's important, let's talk about the struggles. So when you are going rounding or you're talking about what your improvement plans are, let's start with Deanna this time. What do you feel like is your biggest struggle or struggles with infection prevention and sterile processing?
I think I would start off by saying that, back to the previous question, is that not everybody understands the importance of infection prevention in the sterile processing realm. And so I think helping them to understand how we can be a partner with that. And so once you break down that barrier and you really build that partnership, then I would say, at least for my experience, is those departments outside of sterile processing, is helping them understand that point of use cleaning beforehand, the storage, making sure who's following up on it, and helping bridge that gap, because sometimes there isn't that relationship necessarily between sterile processing and those departments. And so I would say, from my perspective, that's probably the biggest struggle, is helping them to work together to make sure that all aspects of it are taken care of, not just the actual sterile processing itself.
Absolutely. Building that bridge to partnership, I think, is pivotal when it comes to IP, because sometimes there might have been bad blood with the previous IP. There might have been situations in the past. You kind of got to begin to help say, hey, I'm kind of your sidekick with this. Like, you're Batman, I'm Robin, and I'm your sidekick, and I'm going to help you go ahead and foster that sort of connection. And look, I have all these tools in my utility belt, and I think we could go ahead and make sure that we're doing a really good job here.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Relationship building, even outside of SPD for infection prevention, is integral in making sure we are effective in what we're trying to accomplish. I would also say, I think one of the biggest struggles, even for me, was just stepping into the space and knowing where to even start. As someone who's never worked in the space, it's hard to even know where to begin when you're trying to do like a gap analysis of your processes and where your opportunities really lie if you don't even know what you're looking at. So that kind of goes hand in hand with that relationship building. You want to learn from your partners at SPD so that you can then begin to actually use your infection prevention eye to identify those opportunities that they might not even realize they have. I know from personal experience, there's so many details to learn about different things that occur in SPD that some people who've worked in there a long time don't even realize. And that's not their fault. It's because no one ever told them or no one ever explained it to them. So it's really, really important to have that partnership and build on that so that you can really start to kind of come together and build a safer environment, safer processes, not only for our patients, but also for our team members and colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely. And as far as talking about struggles, we are going to have some later episodes on compliance and survey readiness. So make sure you tune in to the entire season so you can get some of those tidbits. But I do want to zero in a little bit more on partnership. I hear a lot from my IP and SPD colleagues on the struggles they have with partnership between IPs and SPD. So I really want to get a little bit more into this on how we can better partner as IPs with SPD. So we've talked a little bit about how we know we need to just go in there and we need to observe more. We need to just say, I don't know what I'm doing. But what advice would you guys have for, let's start with IPs who are newer. Like you said, Ben, you were newer. How do you just start that relationship with SPD, whether you're new or you're new to the field? What do you have as far as advice for those IPs?
Sure. So I think it's important to, well, first of all, you need to understand what position you're in coming into IP. Some people actually start as the sole IP, kind of that manager leadership role without having the title. But a big part of coming into a position like that is that relationship building with the leadership over these different departments, building that rapport, making sure they understand kind of what your experience is and what it is that you're trying to accomplish in their space. If you're a newer IP coming in to a department in general, it's important to start with the relationship building and then move into working with that team on how you can, I don't want to say become their friend, but make sure they understand that you're their ally. You're not just there to police them and tell them everything they're doing wrong. You're there to learn and have that kind of communication with them that is cooperative, that you're there to try and help them stay safe and help improve patient safety for their patients that they might not even realize they're really helping with patient safety in general, and really kind of making sure that they understand how important they are, I think is all part of that relationship building.
So it seems like you pretty much have the, build trust seems to be kind of that through line between what you're talking about, building the trust, building the partnerships, so on and so forth. And it kind of reminds me, Ben, of when I started supporting SPD. I just showed up and I was like, I know nothing. And I was like, you're the subject matter expert. I was like, can you teach me the nooks and crannies of SPD, which kind of allowed us to start to build that trust overall, which I'm hearing from you as well.
Yeah, exactly. Trust. If they don't trust you, they're not going to want to share anything with you. I'm sure they'll tell you yes or no to a question you have, but trying to kind of pull teeth isn't the best way to learn a field or learn a new subject as an infection preventionist. So if they can trust that you're there to help them and not just to tell on them when something's wrong, I think that's a really important aspect of that relationship.
Yeah, because how easy is it for us to walk into a sterile processing area where we don't really 100% understand it and we say, well, you're not following the manufacturer's instructions for use. Well, looking at those things are so complex, so they just think, oh, well, this person who doesn't know what they're looking at is trying to help us to do this. So if you don't have that trust, you don't have that understanding, well, they may not have any reason to really trust or believe what you're saying or want to go with what you're saying. So I think if you're willing to spend that time in there learning the basics at least, and gaining that trust, I think you're going to get a lot farther in the long run when you do go back there and say, well, you're not following these. Well, here's the why. How can we get where we need to be?
And Deanna, to flip the question around a little bit, what do you have as far as advice for those that work in SPD to strengthen the relationship with their IP?
That is a great question. I think reaching out to them to say, hey, where are you willing to come spend time here? Because there are areas that they might not understand why infection preventionists care so much about them. So being willing to ask that question if you're not aware of it, being willing to see the other side of the coin, because I think once you have that better understanding, then when we come to ask you questions or we're looking at your environment, we're looking at this stuff, you're really going to have a better understanding as to the why. And it might not be so frustrating when you get that report or that us telling you, hey, fix this, please, if you really spend that time on both sides.
Yeah, and I would say this is where that leadership relationship comes in, because thinking about the different setup for, say, an infection preventionist and the freedom they have in their day-to-day workflow versus someone who's working in SPD might not have that level of freedom to just get up and come shadow us. So having the leadership kind of build in something, say, into an orientation or something into an annual competency that actually integrates infection prevention into what they do and is an expectation, can help actually create that space for them to feel comfortable to come and talk to us and learn more about it.
Well, and I think just getting to know them as a person in general, like getting to know who is your sterile processing tech, getting to know their names, when is sterile processing week, getting to know some of the basics, I think is such an essential part. It's not just getting to know their work, but they're people too, and how can we understand that from the depth or from the ground up?
Deanna, you brought up such a good point. A first name goes a long way with establishing trust. Remember names. All IPs hear that. Remember names. It will pay dividends. If you know a name, you can get very far in the hospital world.
With all the organism names we remember, surely we can remember a few more names. That's great, guys. Thank you for all of those tips. I think that we really hit the nail on the head with saying that you have to build the relationships first. And I will tell you, the best respect that I have received from my sterile processing department is when I started spending a lot of time there and I started asking them to show me how they do things and let me put all the PPE on and see how hot it gets in here. And, I think that is the best time you will see them start to relate to you, because when you take all the PPE off and they see that you are now as sweaty as they are and you can now go advocate to facilities, you will suddenly gain their respect more than anything. So really start to work alongside of the folks in sterile processing and advocate for them because you truly know what they're doing, because you did it, not because you read about it in a book or you read an article, but because you really did it. And so that's really what I advocate for IPs to do, and for sterile processing folks to invite them to do, is walk in my shoes and really show IPs what you do, how hard it is. When I worked in sterile processing for a half a day, I couldn't walk for days because my legs hurt, my back hurt, and I think I sweated off half my body weight. So kudos to everybody in sterile processing, and I really wish more IPs had that kind of experience. All right. So we are almost ready to close this session, this first session of the Pathogens and PPE podcast series. And this has been so great kicking off this season. I want to give Deanna, Frankie, and Ben a chance to just give us any last tidbits that from IPs to SPD, anything that they want to say as some last words. Deanna, anything that you would like to say to our friends in SPD?
I would just say thank you for what you do every day. Like Jill said, if you spend a couple hours in sterile processing, you really understand the work that goes into it and how complex it is and how much sweating you do and everything. So how much you do to protect our patients, even if you don't realize how truly important your role is, we're just forever grateful for it. So just a thank you for that.
And Ben?
Yeah, I would echo that. Thank you. Thank you for all the hard work that you do. We appreciate it when we can build those partnerships with you, because we're just as interested in what you're doing and how important your role is in preventing infections up in the OR and on every unit in the hospital. Please welcome us into your spaces. We want to learn and we want to grow just as much as you do. So thank you.
Wrap it up for us, Frankie.
And I would have to say, bring us your complex problems. I think when you need some more people to help advocate on your behalf, IP can really see how not only it's an issue in SPD, potentially an issue in other places as well, whether it be the OR, the inpatient units. It largely is more than SPD, and we can provide the backup that you need to help you get what you get. So bring us those complex problems, and it's also letting us know we've got your trust as well. When people are like, hey, I have something I'm going to show you. I know it's not good, but I need your help. You've made it, and it's just benefiting the patients at the end of the day.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Deanna and Ben, for being our guests today. And thank you to my co-host, Frankie.
As we learned in this episode, you don't need to know everything when you're going into SPD, but knowing a little bit will help. And hopefully this episode will help you learn a little bit more, so that way you can get in SPD and continue to learn a little bit more, so that way you feel confident and comfortable back in there in the sterile processing area.
And for those of you listening that already work in SPD, I hope that you are inspired to call up your IP and say, hey, do you want to come down here, spend some time working? Let me show you what we do. Round with me, and just let your IP learn what you do. Walk a mile in my shoes and really start to learn from each other. I think this episode really showed us how important that partnership is between infection prevention and sterile processing. So I hope that after you listen to our guests today, you really understand that we really can't be successful without each other. So we hope to see you on future episodes. And with that, we are going to wrap up today.
Don't forget to wash your hands.
And keep fighting dirty.
Thanks for tuning in to this exclusive podcast series on pathogens and PPE. For more information and clinical resources to help you fight dirty, make sure to follow us on social media by searching for Beyond Clean and Transmission Control.